All right. So I went in and set up, performed all of, I performed all of the setup that was outlined in the README. So I did a create React app on the with a project called Instagram, and then once I had that, put in the different directories inside the source folder, put the tests in the source folder as well as dummy data here. Okay, and then did stuff like ran the npm install with enzyme and sign-on and stuff, which are needed for testing, and then also added npm installed React Bootstrap, as well as added the Bootstrap style sheets in index.html. So these two lines here. So I think that's pretty much covered all the setup. So let's do this. Okay, so let's just get it up, and yeah, let's do that. So let's if we run npm test just off the bat, just to make sure the tests are working. Obviously, they're all going to fail, but we just want to see if they're able to run to run first. Okay, so the app one passes, and then the other ones fail. Okay, so that's expected. And then I guess we can run an npm start, make sure that's working too. And that'll give us our empty working React app. Okay. Cool. So I'm thinking we'll start with post container and comment section, and then we can maybe save search bar for last, because that one's the most cosmetic one. By the way, I just want to reiterate, we're not going to go over extra credit solutions in this lecture. So I know some people said they wanted to see the solution for the search bar, to see it like actually working, but that can be saved for a different conversation. So let's start off with post container. All right. Oops. Whoa. Why would we start with post container? I guess we don't. I mean, we don't have to. Okay. Does anyone have something they want to see first? Okay. Does anyone else have something they want to see first? Why would we start with post container, please? Okay. So yeah, so the way I would typically think about it is, I mean, so we currently have our app.js as our root component, and this is going to be the root component of our entire React tree, right? So the way I think about it is, I was thinking post container first because post container contains the comment sections inside. So I was going to do post container is the largest component that is the next level after app. So it goes app on top, and then app renders a bunch of post containers, one for each of the different posts inside of our dummy data. Can you make comment pass with that? I don't think so. At least not with the test setup that way. And then each post container renders a post, and then each post has its own comment section. So comment section depends upon post container, because it needs to live inside post container, and then post container is the one that's most encompassing, aside from our React, from our root app component, right? So we have app, which is the entire thing. We have a bunch of post containers. Search bar is a component that lives just on its own at the top of the screen. It has no dependencies. It's just kind of like a cosmetic search bar at the top. So we can so in my mind, I leave that for last because it's the most independent. It's the most, and it's also just the most cosmetic in the sense that it's actually not, it's the least functional in this case, search bar on top of post containers. Right. So, but even though, search bar goes at the top of the page, it's the most, in this project, quote unquote, useless in the sense that it's not really doing anything. Oh, I mean, I would go to app last because app, like I would create all the components, have them wired up in terms of what they each need to do functionality wise, and then come into app to go and clear this out and then specify, import the components that need to go inside the root component and then put them in here. Because right now, like we could work in app and, we could say import post container and import search bar and stuff like that, but we don't have those components yet. So I don't, in my mind, it's kind of like, I save app for last to come here to then wire everything up after all of those components are completed. I mean, don't worry about it. I mean, I've worked with React in like a production setting. Like I have experience. So like, don't feel bad if you weren't able to like come up with this train of thought. Like I wouldn't have been able to in your situation as well either. But that's my train of thought. So hopefully that makes some sense. Hardly. Okay. Cool. So we start in post container. Import React. Okay, so we know we're going to, so post container, like as I said, post container, each post container renders its own comment section. So we know we're going to want the comment section component, even though we haven't made it yet. We can just add this import to the top. And we know it's going to be, the path is going to be comment section slash comment section. And then we'll probably also want, yeah, sorry. Keep forgetting. That's probably too big. How's this? And then, yeah, importing the styles. Okay, and obviously we don't have these yet, but I'm just gonna leave them there for now. Okay, post container. So let's think about this. What does our let me see. How do I want to say this? Let me type. I want to do a quick poll on whether you guys. Okay, so what do you guys think? Which type of component should we use for post container? And your choices are a class component or a functional component. Okay, so one string class, two string functions. Okay. So class passes class state. What do we need? What is it we need to save on the state in this case for the post container if we were to go with a class component? Because right, like a class component is very suitable for, especially if we do need to keep state. But then the question is, what is it we need to actually keep in state in the post container? Okay, don't need to keep state with anything. So yeah, it turns out you don't really need to keep track of any state in the post container. What the post container does is, so the app component will import the dummy data, and app will then specify the post container inside of its render method and then take the post data that it imported and pass that into the post container. Well, app will iterate through the post data and pass each single post object to an instance of the post container. So each post container will receive one object with a single post's worth of data. Yeah, repeat the what I was just saying about the data flow. Like how I would say, so app imports dummy data. I mean, yeah, we'll see this in code as well. I'm just talking about it right now. Again, the idea though is that app Okay, so you did a class, and then inside of state, you kept track of all that. So, okay, so yeah, if you wanted to do things like the heart toggle, then yeah, state is necessary. But just for the standard criteria, for the non-extra credit criteria, um, all post container actually needs to do is it'll receive a post object, right? And inside that post object, we have like the thumbnail URL, we have the image URL, we have the username of the poster. Yeah, and then so it'll receive all that data as props from the app component, and then all the post container. What the post container needs to do is render the thumbnail URL, render the image, and then render a comment section for the most part. So mostly what the post container needs to do is just mostly render the images, and then pass the data on the comments array onto the comment section, because the comment section is what is responsible for handling the comments. So from the post container's perspective, it mostly just needs to render a bunch of images. So when you think of it that way, the post container doesn't need to actually modify any props data. Okay, so again, functional components are great when they just need to render data, and when they can definitely receive props. That's fine, but so they can only ever read the props. They can only ever render them. They can never modify them, because without state, you aren't able to receive props, save that into state, and then modify your state in order to update props. Okay, so just remember that props again are entirely read only when they get passed down from a parent. And then you need to think about, oh, does this parent need to go and modify props? Because if it doesn't, if it just needs to like render them, or if it just needs to pass them on to another component, then it doesn't need to modify them, and so it doesn't need its own state object. Okay. Isn't functional for basic? Yeah. Functional is more basic in the sense that it is mostly appropriate for rendering HTML. Again, it can receive props and render those, or it can receive props and pass them on, but it cannot modify props. If at any point you want to modify some data inside of a component, then you're going to need some state. Okay, so the fundamental question between functional component or a class component is functional components do not modify any data. Okay. Class components, you pick a class component if you need to modify some data within the scope of that component. Okay. And so post container, again, just receives some props from the app root component, passes them on, and or renders some images. And so when you know that that's what the post container is doing, then you realize, oh, it's not actually modifying any data, just it will suffice as a functional component. Okay. At least that's my rationale. So we're gonna do post container, like so. Oops. Sorry. So and then little thing to keep in mind is when you're doing a post container, you need normal parens, because you can't do curly braces. Sorry, this is a little aside. You can do curly braces, but then if you're going to do curly braces like this, you need to do a return. Yeah, exactly. So otherwise, you can just do not curly braces and just start saying your HTML right in there. No, So prop data gets passed down from a parent. If a component receives props, it cannot directly modify props. Props are read only. Okay. So if a component receives props and it needs to modify those props, it needs to then put those in state so that the component can now modify state. Okay. And then Stephanie was asking about, okay. we can talk about the pathing just real quick. Okay, so comment section. And I do recall seeing people having issues with specifying paths. So for the pathing, you need to keep in mind that when we are specifying paths, you need to have them go from the current location. Okay, so for post container JS is inside of this post container directory, and if we're looking for comment section, what we need to do is double dot, which means go outside of this directory. Okay, so we're inside this post container directory right now. We need to go into the path we need to take is we need to go into source, and then we need to go into comment section in order to grab this comment section JS file. Okay, which then means that we need to do, so we need to double dot to go out of the current post container directory into source. So after this double dots, we're now in source, and then in source we go into comment section, and then comment section is the name of the file. Okay. And then one single dot here, because single dot means just check inside of the current directory. So in post container, I don't have the CSS file right now. Sorry. Okay, so the CSS file will live in here, and since it's just in the same post container directory as the post container JS file, we just do single dot because this is already in the same directory as the one we're currently in. Okay. Does that apply to curly braces all the time? If that's something you don't want to, if that's like okay, it's actually probably just easier to, and because it's a habit for you guys to just do curly braces, just, you know what, actually for a simpler heuristic, just go with a curly brace and then just do return. I think maybe that would be easier to remember instead of being like, oh, here I need a normal parentheses. So which I think is probably harder to remember. So we can just do this instead, just so you don't need to like try to memorize in your head. Do a normal curly brace here, do a normal parentheses here. Okay, so I'm going to start specifying post container. Post container is just going to be a div. I'm going to give it a class name of post container. Close that div. Yeah, curly or straight parens is an implied return, so you don't need the actual return keyword. But again, let's keep it this way, so it's. I mean, for those of you who can remember to do that, sure, that's a bit cleaner. If not, though, I'm actually just going to go with this, so it's one less thing you have to like remember. Okay, and then inside of the outermost div, we're going to render two more divs that will each hold their respective images, one being the thumbnail and one being the actual image. So we're going to say class name to be thumbnail. That's correct. That's correct. So if you were to go and do the extra credit where it was like, you need to keep track of likes and stuff like that, then you would need a class component. That's correct. But for our purposes right now, we don't need anything of the sort. Okay, so post container is going to receive a single post data object. And when we're in a class component, the way you receive props is slightly different from a class. It would just, you would do this, and then inside of, one sec, let me illustrate this real quick. So for example, in app, and obviously this won't work yet, but I'm just gonna say, post container. And then, what was that? So whatever you give it the name here, inside of the parameters for the function needs to match whatever you call it here. Okay, so this name, whatever you're giving the name for the prop data that this component is receiving, if it's a functional component, it needs to match this name. Okay, so that's why inside of the parameters here, I mean, we put it inside of an object. So you're always going to put the props inside of an object, and then you specify the name of the prop inside of this, like so. And then that way you just access post data like this. You don't need to say this dot props inside of a functional component. Okay. So this would be thumbnail URL. So we're just grabbing the thumbnail URL off of the post data, because again, post data is a single object inside of the dummy data. Okay, so this is the shape, and we're just grabbing this thumbnail URL. We're also going to grab image URL, likes, timestamps. We're just going to grab these off of this object, and then we're going to take the comments array and pass that off to the comment section. And then we're going to do a span bold of post data dot username to render the username right next to the thumbnail URL, right next to the thumbnail. The B tag is for bolding. And close that span. And then another div tag now for the actual image. Was a single object, we pull the data, pass it onto the component. Right, so inside of app.js will actually be, it'll import post data, it'll receive the entire array of 3 post data objects, and then will actually do some iteration in the app component to say pass every single separate object into its own post container. So that'll happen when we come to app.js, but let's do that in a bit. Okay, so again, just know that post container is going to receive a single object with a single post's worth of data inside. Okay, so image, and then image source be post data.image URL. Yeah, the mapping. So, and then lastly, we need to do the comment section. So we're specifying the comment section needs to be rendered here after the thumbnail as well as the actual image. So we put the comment section component underneath, and then we are passing it the post data.comments array into a prop named comments. Close that, and then export default. Okay, so yeah, that's what the span means. Span is another tag, kind of like along the lines of div. I always forget what the exact difference is between a span and a div are. That's something you can Google very easily though. Okay, so that's our post container. And now I'm gonna if there are other span is inline. Okay, I always forget. But whatever. Okay, so that's post container. Now let's move on to, or let me see. Forget if I had any. So I did like a tiny bit amount of styling in my solution here, but not a whole lot. So actually, I think for those of you who got very far with the styling, it's probably going to be a lot prettier than what I have here. But I just have some here just to showcase, just to reiterate how you can apply some CSS your React components, like what we were talking about in the guided demo. Again, the way I have it organized is the post containers CSS will be in the same directory as the post container file, and then you need to go and import post container CSS into the post container JS file, and then you can just use the selectors that you specified, such as class names and tag names, inside the HTML of post container. You can just use them to target those elements. So I'm targeting the image class, the image tag inside of the image class. Oops. And just specifying, height 25 EM. And then targeting the image tag inside of the thumbnail class component and giving it a height of 5 EM. Right, so we had postcontainer.css imported up here, and I was targeting this div with this class name of thumbnail, so targeting this image, as well as targeting this image tag inside of the class name image. Okay. So yeah, let's move on to comment section. Okay, so comment section, now we know, will definitely need to be a class component because it's going to receive an array of comments as props. So it needs to be able to render those comments, but additionally, we need to be able to have the functionality of being able to add additional comments to the comments array, right? A user needs to be able to come in, type some stuff into an input box, submit that, and that new comment needs to be able to be added to the comments array. So we want to look real quick at what a single comment looks like. We have this comments array here. So this one has 3 comments inside, and each comment is an object with a username property as well as the actual text of the comment. So any new comments we want to add need to follow this, need to have the same object properties. Also needs to have a username as well as a text. EM is CSS measurement unit. Yeah, you can use PX if EM is confusing. Yeah, I just don't use PX because PX is a static measurement unit versus EM, which is dynamic. So EM will change based on stuff like the size of the current screen that whatever stuff is being rendered on is. So for example, like if you, EM is good because if you're on like a mobile, PX the old way. Yeah. So for example, if you're on like a mobile screen, and you you know you like turn the screen, right? So that will change the sizing of whatever window is being rendered on. If you use the dynamic measurements, those will actually resize the images relative to the new size of the screen and stuff like that. Versus PX, which actually won't do that. It'll just have the image stay the same even when the screen size changes. And that's about all I know about CSS. Okay, so we're in comment section. So yeah, we're going to need comment section to be a class component. And then component. Good old constructor and super, and then we're going to do state. We're going to need our comments array as well as comment, because we're going to need the new comment field to hook up to our input box, so that when a user types into the input box, it will update this new comment field with whatever it is they're typing. Okay. Okay, and so what we're going to do here now is when the comment section receives props. Okay, so the comment section will receive the comments array as props from the parent, from the post container. And then what it needs to do, because we do need to be able to modify that array of comments, is inside of a component did mount lifecycle method, we need to say set state, put the props array that we just received as inside of state. Okay, so we're going to do component did mount, and in here, this is going to take the props data that this component just received and then put it inside of state. So we're going to say this dot set state comments to be this dot props dot comments. Okay. We've briefly talked about this before in the guided demo, but does anyone near this need to have this reiterated? Setting the state, correct. Recording purposes, always for yes. Okay. Right. So if you think about the flow of what's actually happening, so the comment section completes its mounting, so it gets mounted to the DOM, and at that point, because we've initialized it to an empty array, it will actually just render an empty array. It will just render an empty, an array of comments with nothing in it, because we've just finished mounting, but we haven't called component did mount yet. Okay, so that's what initially happens. There's a brief point in time where it will have the component will have completed mounting, but will not have called component did mount yet, because that comes right after it's finished mounting. Okay, and the comments will initially just be an empty array, but then it will receive the props. It will call, once it's completed mounting, it will call component did mount, and it will access this props comments and then put those, replace this empty array with those comments. We're just saying that comments is going to equal. Yes. It's mounting comments from dummy data. Why not set the state of the comments in the first place? Because sometimes there's, well, okay. So a couple of reasons. Okay, so the main reason why we're following this flow is, and the main reason why you even use component did mount typically, as I was talking about the guided demo, is when you're making like API requests to some external API. Okay, so we're basically trying to mimic this flow with the dummy data. So instead of having you guys go out and make actual API requests, we're just saying, okay, let's just put the data file right in the project and use that to kind of mimic having to do that. Okay, so what may happen, a very possible scenario, in the case that we're actually making an API request, is the components complete mounting, but the API request hasn't returned yet, right? So there's a very real scenario where if you wanted to say put this dot props comments straight inside of the array here, perhaps this dot props dot comments doesn't exist yet because the API request hasn't returned yet. So upon initializing this, upon the initial mounting of the component, this might not even be a thing yet, in which case then the component wouldn't be able to render. Which is why then we initialize it to an empty array and then put this inside of a component did mount, because when the API request finally returns, then the entire React application will actually re-render. So like the data will come back and a component will receive it and it will need to pass props down, which will actually prompt React to re-render the components that need to re-render in response to receiving that data. Okay. Essentially, yes, this is a fudge in the sense that, yeah, we decided to cut out having you guys actually go and access an external API. So it doesn't make perfect sense with why we would do this, because here we're going to have this props comments because we're not making an actual API request. The file is right here, and there's never going to really be a point where, you know, we made the request for the data and that request just hasn't finished yet. But that's the flow we're trying to emulate. Okay, so doing it this way is really specifically for the case when you make an API request and you need to wait for that data to come back. And so we can't just straight put this props comments in this array, because we don't necessarily have a guarantee that when this component mounts, that data will be available to us. That's a possible. I've seen it done both ways. So like the app, the API, the request for the data, you know, if it's very specific to this component, it would make more sense to just put the get request in here. Like it is possible, and I have seen it done where you would put get requests inside of individual components. Though I think that being said, in the case of this particular application, where, you know, we are grabbing just entire post objects off Instagram API and then just kind of propagating that data down into child components like post container and comment section, then I think it makes more sense to actually just have the root app component make the get request, fetch all the data, and then send it all straight down into the relevant components. So yes, API calls can go in the main app.js. I've also seen it where individual components make API requests, depending on if it can just be like, you know, this component needs to fetch some data from an API that only concerns this component. But in this case, our app would be more appropriate. Our app root component would be more appropriate to make the get request, because we need to fetch data that then gets used by a whole bunch of different components. So it makes more sense to have the highest level component grab that and then propagate it down throughout your React application tree. You wouldn't say comments right away because the comment data can change. Yes. In a way, not necessarily change, but you just kind of need to wait for it to actually come in. You need to wait for it to arrive. And we don't necessarily know when that will arrive. Yeah. But anyway, like making API requests from React is a slightly separate topic that, you know, we're not really getting into here. We will get into it in future sprints. Again, it depends kind of how that API data is being used. So what I just said with how you need to think about whether you're making an API request for data that your entire application or a lot of components in your application needs, versus making an API request that just needs to fetch data to be used by like a single component. So in the case where you need to go fetch some API data that's pretty much just used by a single component, it makes more sense to actually just have that one component make that request and receive the data that it needs. I still don't fully understand component didn't mount. Component didn't mount. The only thing about component didn't mount is, again, Again, we were talking about mounting and unmounting of components. Component didn't mount is called by the React component after it has completed mounting, as opposed to, like, for example, component will mount, which actually gets called before the component even mounts. But the problem with that is that we have no guarantee that the component will have completed mounting by the time the data is received. Again, going back to the scenario of actually making API requests. right? So I did mention before that in the guided demo where I was saying there, at first glance, perhaps to some people, it makes more sense to go and put API requests from a component. If a component needs to make an API request, it might make sense initially to go and say, hey, put the API request inside of component will mount instead of component did mount, because component will mount is called earlier, which means we have more headway time to, we may have to wait less time for the API request to come back. The rationale being, before the component's even mounted, go and make the request for the data, and then we have this time where the component needs to actually mount, and then by the time the component is finished mounting, it'll receive the data, and then we can just mount it. Versus component did mount, we wait for the component to finish mounting first and then make the request. But the problem there is that, again, we have no guarantee that we have no guarantee of when the API request data will return. So it's also very possible that inside of component will mount, it makes an API request, and then the component starts mounting, and the API request returns before the component has completed mounting. In which case, now because the component has not completed mounting yet, it's not able to receive the API data that it just requested. So we err on the safer side of saying, always just wait for the component to have completed mounting first before making any API requests for data that the component then needs to receive. Can you explain how render behaves in between will mount and distant? Okay, again, component did mount and component will mount and stuff like that, those lifecycle methods are pretty much called once within the span of a component's lifecycle. Okay, so if you click like hard refresh on the browser, then yes, that will cause your entire React application to unmount and then go through the entire remounting process again. Okay, it'll cause every component to have to be remounted if you click on a hard refresh on your browser. But we have also seen, React components update without the page having to do a hard refresh, right? We've seen that where we updated some data in state and the component changed and to reflect the change, even though the page itself didn't hard refresh, right? And so that means then that the render function is being called multiple times within the span of a component's lifecycle. Okay, so again, you come to a page with React components on it. For the first time, the mounting of all those components happen. Okay, if you hit a hard refresh, then those components need to be unmounted and then remounted again. Okay, but in between, that's otherwise in other cases though, if we just go and update some data in state, that will just call the render function. But component did mount and component will mount will not be called again in the case of updating some state data. Okay. Yeah. State management, correct. And no, component did mount itself is not an API request. Component did mount is just an appropriate place to make an API request. Again, all component did mount is a method that React exposes to the developer to say, hey, anything you want to run, any logic you want to execute after the component has finished mounting, you do it in here. That's all it is. Yeah, that's correct, Pat. So if a component also receives new props, then yes, that will also prompt a re-render. So state changes, also if a component receives new props, those are kind of the main catalysts that a component would then call render again in order to respond to. Okay. So we add component did mount, and then, okay, now we're also going to need an add comment as well as a handle comment input methods. And again, these are arrow functions because, and handle comment input. These are arrow functions because these are methods on the class that we are adding ourselves. Component did mount and render are methods that React provides to us through the base component class, which is why we don't need to do arrow functions. Okay. I think both of these are going to take the event object and then so handle comment input is just going to be hooked up to the little input box. Anytime a user types into the input box, that will call set state in order to go and update this new comment property on the state object. So this is going to be this dot set state new comment target value, and then new comment, which is going to be called whenever we actually go and submit the form. We'll go and add the comment to our comments array, to our whatever comments array we have in place at that point, which, you know, ideally would be the comments array we received from this props comments, which will now be in this .state.comments. So first thing, we're going to call prevent default because we are submitting a form. We don't want the page to hard refresh every time we submit a form. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a new comment object, because again, every comment is an object with username as well as text. Okay. So for the purposes of this, I think I specified in the README just hard code some username. Because there's no login flow or anything like that, so the only way to get around this is just, or I mean, you could have like a little pop-up or something to say like, type your name, and then that'll like populate this username for you. But I didn't go and do that. Text here will be the whatever text is inside this new comment string. This .state . I guess another thing you could have done is have multiple like input fields. And say one for populating a username and another for populating a text. Whenever you want to go and add a new comment, that's possible too. But here I just hard coded a username. Okay, so we create this comment object. We need to go and get a reference to, oh, sorry. Thanks. Yeah, we're reading off of state. We're not setting state there. We're going to get a reference to our comments array. We're going to do comment array dot push comment object, and then we're going to call set state with this new comment object. Comment array and new comment to be empty string to clear it out after we submit a comment. Okay. Okay, looks good. And then we have handle comment input. And then lastly, we need our render method. Okay. So for this class name of comment section. So again, for comment section, we're going to go and map over our array of comments, render each one of those with the username as well as the text. So we're going to do this .state.comments.map. Oops. This will receive a single comment as well as the index. And we're going to do div class name comment cube I. Another thing you also could have done is just created a separate comment component as well to just encapsulate these divs here. But we'll do this instead of a b tag to bold them, and then do comment.username. Map will not modify the data. No, it won't. This is just for rendering it all, but then when we go and add the ability for a user to input new comments, then we will be modifying that data. B tag. B is for bolding. So any text in between B tags will just be bolded. Then we'll close that div. Okay. Then we're going to now add the div that will contain the form for adding comments. So let's call oops. Common input with 2 N's. Input type text. Value this dot state dot new comment, so that this input box is hooked up to the new comment property on our state, and then on change strong the latest. Okay, cool. Sure, I can do that. On change this dot. And then a button for I guess strictly speaking, this isn't actually a form because it's not using a form tag, but close enough. Wow. Okay. So that's our comment section component. That was very fast for the render section. Okay. Sure. So okay. So yeah, again, render will have 2 main sections to it. There's the actual div that contains the list of all the comments, right? And then this div down here is the quote unquote form for adding new comments. So again, this is the div here. This everything here is just the list of comments. 44. Oh, with on change. This handle comment input. Oh yeah, my editor does that. Sorry. Thanks. Good catch. Okay. We good to move on? I'm gonna take that as a yes. Okay. Scroll to the this way. State above also. Here's correct. Here we're actually calling the set state function. Here's correct. We're actually calling the set state function. Same with here. But other than that, everything else should be this dot state. So maybe I don't know if I've missed. Oh, right. So that should be state. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So now let's move on to search bar. Scroll to the right here. And I'll release the solution branch afterwards anyways. So you guys will have something to reference. You don't need to like copy everything down here right now. On changes the state new comment. That shouldn't be what it, no, it should be value. Oh yeah, sorry. No, I mean, yeah, we have the solution code that we released to you guys after the solution lectures. You guys don't need to be copying all this down during the solution lectures. Yeah. Faster typer. All right. Search bar. So for search bar, the one I'm going to show is just going to, it will be a class component just because I'm going to have it just like console log whatever was typed into the input. But again, it won't actually do any filtering or anything of that sort. And it's going to, here we're going to use some bootstrap components, specifically nav bar and button. So you'll want to go and import those at the top of the file from React Bootstrap. And then I'm going to do class search bar. Yes, correct. Inside of index.html in the public folder. Is there any issue if we just make all the components the class instead of? Yeah, that won't be an issue. Like it'll still work just fine. It's just if you want to be, if you're more if it matters to you more about like minimizing overhead and stuff like that, then functional you like try to think about when to use functional components when they're appropriate, because that will minimize overhead and stuff like that. Like basically just the idea of, use the smallest tool for what you need. You use like the minimal, I don't know how I want to say it. Because if you just use a functional component, it's like you're not importing a class there. You're not importing the React component class. You're like, just putting yourself in the mindset of like using the minimal tool for the job is basically the point there of using functional versus class. But no, indeed, you can, if you want to be like safe and you aren't comfortable with your ability to kind of evaluate, what type of component I need for a certain task or whatever, then the safe bet is always class components. Okay, I'm going to do a state object here that is just going to have a field called search input. And this will basically just be like new comment, right? So we'll have the little search bar and someone can type into it. And when they type into it, that'll update this search input here, and then they'll hit submit. And the submit method will just console log whatever they submitted and clear out the input box. That's pretty much all this is going to do. Okay, so there's going to be the handle submit method. There's going to be handle search input for when the user types into the input box, and this is just going to be set, same thing as the new comment, where it will be set state of search input target.value. Handle submit is just going to be, again, prevent default, because we don't want to cause any unwanted behavior when we go and do the actual submitting. And this will just console log search input. This state, this dot set state, and then this dot set state of search input to be back to empty string in order to clear out that input box. Okay, so now in the render method, we're going to go and yeah, sure. We'll see if we can figure it out. Like, hopefully that test will work for me when I do it here, but we'll see. All right, so here we're going to use the React Bootstrap components, specifically navbar, which will get you the nice looking like navigation bar at the top of a screen. And for that, there's different parts to the navbar component. So there's like navbar header, which is like where the actual text is, or like the it's not rendering right now, but like it'll be like this text, this failed to compile text here, or as like the main part, the header of the navigation bar, for example. And then navbar brand is like the link where you would click on like this text here, for example. Like typically you go to like a site's page and they'll have their logo or their name or whatever, and you can go and click on that and it will like redirect or something. But here it's not going to actually, this link isn't actually going to be active. Something like that. And we're going to have navbar.form, which will be the little okay. Pull left in order to have it go to the left. And this will be input. on change search input. And then button establishing NC React Bootstrap themed button. On click, it's going to call this dot submit. Yeah, that's true. You don't actually need Bootstrap here, but it just makes it a lot faster just to be able to drop these components in and have them already themed for you. Close this. Outdoor form. Okay, and then default search bar. Do not close everything. Okay, cool. So that's it for search bar. And again, React Bootstrap's page does a really good job of showing you how to the right. Again, I mean, you guys don't need to like be feverishly copying this down. We're gonna like give you guys a link to the solution code after this. No, it doesn't. Okay. So now that is the search bar component. To go and all right, so let's rip out all of this. So now you go and hook everything up inside of our app component. So let's actually rip all this out and let's change this from a class component into a function component, because again, this component doesn't need to keep track of any state itself. It's a class name of app. We need to go and import search bar from components, search bar. And then we also need to import post container. Yeah, that's definitely one rule of thumb you can use. Import. Oh yeah. Search bar, and then now we're going to map over. Oh, we have to import dummy data as well. We import data from the rule of thumb. We'll use function class. Yeah. Okay, now we're going to go and map over our dummy data, And for each object that we iterate over inside of the dummy data array, we are going to pass that off to a post container. So that would just be dummy data.map. We'll go image can disappear. Yeah, we can leave it there. Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm not using it. So yeah, sure. Map. Let's call it post. And then throw into a post container. Key of I and post data to be post. And close this div. Okay, sure. Sorry, sure. Let's do that. Sure, let's do that. Okay. Okay. Model not found. So here we're in app.js. We need to go into not component. I slightly messed up the setup. I didn't go and create a components directory. Okay, so my path is going to be a little different here. No refresh. Compiling. Okay. So now that compiled, and this is all the styling I have. Not much. I pretty much just changed the size of these images so that they weren't gigantic. And we can go and add comments, and it'll do so with the username I hard coded in for any one of these comment sections. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, like so. I think, I'm not sure the tests will work if I don't have the components folder. Actually, I'm thinking that I will need to go and change the paths in those. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, the tests expect the components folder, which I forgot. Yeah, so that should work. That. And then one. Uh-oh. What's a different? Can we probably map of undefined? Is it a, are you getting a type error? Can't read property map of undefined? Or do you get a different set state? I know why, and I know how to fix it. So for this, I think it's because, I don't know why this happens, but we're gonna have to make use of that insurance policy that I talked about previously. Should render input tag. Yeah, so I think one way to fix it would be to do this dot state dot comments, put this in a ternary, and then otherwise render null here. I think that's correct. Okay, so that didn't fix everything. That fixed the map issue. So now the ternary is guarding against that, so if it sees undefined, it'll just return null, which is fine for the tests. Should expect valid comment section test.js received to be defined. Expect value instead of received undefined. Let's see. Can we go back to the test file? This one? Oh, the one I'm failing, yeah. So it should be a comment. Yeah, here, and this is failing the test line 25 here. Okay. The test file needs a data foo on the component. Like, you mean as a prop? Let's just store comments instead. Oh. Comment singular or plural? Okay, you can't just leave that empty. Comments. Store comments instead. Oh. State comments in an array. Wow. Nice. Oh yeah, that works too. Yeah, actually, that's a good catch. Very nice, Jessica. One more time just to make sure. Okay. So I kind of suspected that might have been my bad on the test. So at least we fixed it now. I mean, I've reiterated multiple times that, you know, the test writer is not perfect. The person who writes the tests is not perfect. So don't expect the tests to be perfect. There may be issues. Why is there no index HTML? Oh, it's just located in the public directory. So if you go into the public folder, there's the index HTML file. That's just how they organize it when you use Create React App. So there's hope. Nice. I see line 11 app.js. Yes, okay, nice. Line 11. You guys always want to see the lines with all the iteration and mapping. Yeah, I figured that would probably be the case. when you guys are beating your heads on it for that long, I thought it's probably an issue with the test. My bad. That's some dark humor right there. Yeah, that's correct, Pat. If you can kind of realize, what are the underlying patterns that are going on with the code, then it's really easy to apply that to. It becomes a lot easier to apply that. So that's definitely the right mindset with how you want to be thinking about these. Do we need the ternary and search bar or not rendering input tag? Do not have a turn. Are you talking about in the render method? Not rendering an input tag. So you do have an input tag in your search bar? Yes. Do you want to screenshot your code or something? Or I guess I can, if you have a recent pull request, I can look at that too to see where, why that might be failing. Is it possibly because you have the B capitalized in navbar? Is it actually working when you go and type npm start? That's not it. Okay. Yeah, that looks fine to me. Go check what that test is doing again. Search for test. Try with navbar. One sec. I'm gonna let my dog out of the room because he is whining. Come on. Is it failing because it's finding like multiple input? I mean, I guess you'd have to go and kind of put a console log in the test and maybe try to see, or from your test output, what it's giving you when you try that, when you try running the test, because it'll say to you how many inputs it's actually finding from the test output. Select app. Is this when you try running the tests or when you run npm start? Navbar thing fix the other errors from the tests. Invalid value for prop. Oh, action. I don't think action is a proper. There's no such handler called action of buttons. I don't think. So that should be like an on click or something. Yeah. So action here is not a prop because button is not a React component. Button here is an HTML tag. So you need to go and actually use the name prescribed for the actual. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. So here it probably needs to be like an on click. Nice. I'm going to everybody error about Bootstrap. I know I've got them correctly placed in my index.html file. What's the error you're getting, Sean? Did you npm install React Bootstrap? So you need to also do the npm install as well as adding those links in the index.html. Yeah, you need to go and run npm install -- save. Okay. Before the start. I mean, that's kind of the pattern we've been doing with all the repositories, though. Okay, but are there any more questions pertaining to the actual solution or anything? Oh, I see. Yeah, I can spell that out more precisely in the README. Just how to push it up to origins. We built it different. You would just push it up the same way. I mean, so you should be in the same repository, the same React repository, and then your Instagram project should be inside there, so you can just push that one up. It'll be different than if you did create React app in a separate, like not in the React repository, and then want to push that up. Yeah, for the rest of the day, yes. And then tomorrow there will be a React sprint challenge. I need hot tub and hot chocolate. It sounds nice right now. Except I'm in freaking LA. So no, a hot tub would not actually be nice for me. Nope, that's CSS. Where's the one looks ugly, but whatevs. Yeah. No, post container does not need to be a class. Video and GitHub solution, please. Michael, you can DM me your post container render or something, but I think let's talk about that outside of this lecture. Be in your repo. Not at this time. Not right now. Okay, I think I'm gonna go and end the meeting here. Oh. You have you have straight parens right after the arrow and then the return. So if you're doing a normal parens after the arrow, then get rid of the return statement because you already have an implied return there. Or you can change the parens right after the arrows to curly braces, and that would work too. Okay, so if anyone still has further questions afterwards, just feel free to direct message me, but I think I'm going to go and end the meeting here. All right, thanks guys. I'll talk to you all later.